Evelyn Castillo spent decades working double shifts as a nurse, sacrificing everything to finally buy and restore her dream manor. But when her son Marcus and his fiancée Celeste sent out more than 250 wedding invitations using her estate as the venue, without asking, Evelyn was left shocked and humiliated. Instead of giving in, she made a daring decision that would change everything. She secretly rented her manor to a powerful event company for the same day, setting the stage for a dramatic clash between family betrayal and her newfound authority. What followed was chaos, desperation, and a public lesson in respect that no one would ever forget. If you enjoy powerful stories like this one, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Now let us begin the story of how one mother turned a wedding into the most unforgettable lesson of all. Evelyn Castillo had always believed that peace came in the quiet moments. The rustle of pine trees behind her stone manor, the sound of distant gulls crying out along the coast, the stillness of early mornings when the world had not yet demanded anything from her. At 70 years old, she cherished these moments more than ever. After a lifetime of sacrifice, these hours of calm were the gift she had finally earned, or so she thought. It was a Tuesday morning when the peace shattered. Evelyn was in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of strong black coffee when the phone rang. She almost ignored it, thinking it was another neighbor checking in, or perhaps her doctor reminding her of an appointment. But something about the insistent ring drew her to it. She answered with her usual polite tone, never expecting the voice on the other end to change her life. "Good morning, ma'am. I just need to confirm the flower arrangements for Saturday's wedding at Castillo Manor." The words froze her in place. Wedding. At her manor, Evelyn tightened her grip on the receiver, sure she had misheard. "I am sorry, what wedding are you talking about?" she asked, her voice unsteady. The man chuckled, clearly amused at what he thought was a joke. "The wedding of Marcus Castillo and Miss Celeste Beaumont. I have the address right here, scheduled for Saturday. 250 guests. We are bringing roses, orchids, table garlands, the whole package. We just need to know where to unload everything." Evelyn nearly dropped the phone. The coffee cup rattled in her other hand, dark liquid spilling across the counter. She steadied herself against the kitchen table, her heart pounding like a drum. "You must be mistaken," she whispered. But deep down she knew it was no mistake at all. Her only son Marcus had planned his wedding at her estate, and he had not bothered to tell her. The florist continued to chatter about colors and deliveries, oblivious to the storm rising inside her. Evelyn ended the call as quickly as she could, her fingers trembling. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the stone walls she had spent years restoring, and felt an icy wave of disbelief. How could her own child betray her like this? How could he treat her sanctuary as if it were nothing more than a convenient hall to be rented? The phone rang again not long after. This time it was the caterer, then the sound company, then the photographer. Each voice confirmed the same terrible truth. Her manor, the place she had fought so hard to claim as her own, was already marked for an event she had no part in planning. By the fourth call, Evelyn no longer answered with confusion. She answered with silence, listening as one stranger after another described the grand day that was being built on her land. Her land. The words echoed in her chest like a drumbeat. She wandered through the manor in a daze. The high ceilings, the polished oak floors, the paintings she had hung carefully over the years, all of it seemed to whisper betrayal. She stepped out onto the wide stone porch, the morning air heavy with sea mist. Beyond the gardens, the tall gates of Castillo Manor stood proud against the world. But Evelyn no longer felt proud. She felt invisible. It was not only the invasion of her space that hurt, it was the sheer audacity of it. Marcus had not forgotten. He had not slipped. He had deliberately decided that his mother's opinion did not matter, that her years of work and sacrifice were worth less than a signature on a wedding invitation. Evelyn sat down on the porch bench, her coffee now cold in her hands. Her mind was a storm of disbelief and anger. Memories came rushing back to her, uninvited and sharp. She remembered the nights she spent walking home from double shifts at the hospital, her shoes soaked with rain, her bones aching from endless hours of caring for strangers. She remembered every penny she saved in a worn envelope tucked under her bed. She remembered the day she first laid eyes on the crumbling stone estate at the edge of town and the fire that lit in her chest when she told herself she would make it hers. Every wall, every window, every rosebush in the garden had been restored with her hands and her willpower. And now her son had claimed it as his own stage, without asking, without gratitude, without even respect. The more she thought of it, the stronger the fire inside her grew. At first it was sorrow, then betrayal. Then slowly but surely something new began to rise. A cold determination, a whisper of defiance. Evelyn Castillo had been invisible for too long. She had been dismissed, overlooked, treated as if her sacrifices meant nothing. But this time she would not be silent. She stood from the bench and looked across the grounds. The ivy along the manor walls curled like dark veins against the stone. The pine trees swayed their branches, whispering in the morning breeze. To anyone else it might have been an ordinary sight, but to Evelyn it was a reminder. This was hers. She had fought for it. She had earned it. And she would not allow anyone, not even her own blood, to take it away. Still, as much as the anger filled her, there was another sensation Evelyn could not ignore. A creeping sense of curiosity. Why had Marcus done this? Why had Celeste agreed to it? Did they truly believe she would simply bow her head and serve them on their grand day? Or was there something more hidden beneath their decision? Something she had yet to uncover? The questions weighed on her heavily as she went back inside. She moved through the halls with a new awareness, her eyes tracing every corner, every shadow. The manor felt different now, like it was keeping secrets of its own. That night Evelyn could not sleep. She sat awake by the window, watching the pale moonlight fall across the gardens. She imagined the crowd of strangers who would soon trample her lawns, spill wine on her floors, laugh and celebrate in rooms they did not respect. And the more she imagined it, the more unbearable it became. By dawn, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not allow her son's wedding to happen on her terms. If he thought Castillo Manor was his for the taking, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. And as the first light of day crept across the coast, Evelyn's thoughts turned to the past, to the sacrifices she had made, and to the long, grueling path that had led her to this place. It was not just a house. It was her legacy, her fortress, her life's work. What Marcus and Celeste had underestimated was not just her ownership, they had underestimated her strength. And soon they would discover the full weight of it. Evelyn Castillo had not planned to think about the past that morning. But once the storm of betrayal began, her memories rose like waves she could no longer hold back. She sat by the window of her bedroom, gazing out at the sprawling manor grounds, and let herself remember the long path that had carried her here. For most of her life, Evelyn's world was not made of ivy walls and rose gardens. It was made of sterile hospital corridors and endless fluorescent lights. She had been a nurse for 40 years, a steady figure in white shoes and scrubs, moving through the lives of others like a shadow. She cared for the sick, the forgotten, the dying, and in return she received long shifts, aching joints, and the kind of exhaustion that settled deep into her bones. Money was always scarce. The small apartment where she raised Marcus was barely enough to keep out the cold. Still, Evelyn was determined. She told herself again and again that every hour she worked, every dollar she saved, was a stone laid on the path to something greater. Her co-workers sometimes laughed at her stubborn frugality, but Evelyn knew what she was doing. While others spent, she saved. While others sought comfort, she endured. The dream first appeared years earlier when she passed a faded advertisement pinned on a bulletin board at a bus stop. It showed a photograph of a crumbling estate outside the coastal town, its windows boarded, its walls streaked with age. The words read simply "Manor for sale, price negotiable." Most would have dismissed it as impossible, but Evelyn had stopped in her tracks. Something about the image reached into her chest and refused to let go. For weeks, she carried that image in her mind. At night, after long shifts, she would imagine herself walking through stone corridors that belonged only to her. She pictured gardens alive with flowers of her choosing, walls that echoed with her laughter, and a fireplace that burned just for her. The manor became more than a house. It became a promise. Of course, reality did not bend easily. The price was far beyond what she had saved, and the years stretched ahead of her with no shortcuts in sight. Still, Evelyn was relentless. She began taking extra shifts sometimes, working through nights and into mornings without rest. She stitched her uniforms by hand when they frayed, rather than buying new ones. She gave up new shoes, new coats, even simple outings, tucking every spare dollar into a plain envelope hidden beneath her mattress. Marcus grew up watching her labor. As a boy, he sometimes asked why she worked so much, why she denied herself so often. She would only smile, press his hair back from his forehead, and tell him that one day he would understand. It took her 5 years of doubled effort before the envelope was full enough to take seriously. By then her hands were cracked from harsh soaps, her back stiff from bending over countless patients. But her spirit remained unbroken. She walked into the bank with trembling fingers, clutching every bill she had ever earned, and made an offer. The day she signed the papers, the world shifted. Evelyn remembered the first time she walked through Castillo Manor after the sale. Dust coated every surface, cobwebs filled the corners, and the air smelled of neglect. But to her it was a palace. She touched the cold stone walls and whispered to herself, "This is mine." Tears blurred her vision, and she wept like a child, not from sorrow but from overwhelming triumph. She had claimed a place in the world. From that moment the manor became her life's work. She poured herself into it with the same determination that had carried her through decades of nursing. She planted roses along the garden walls, nurtured them until they climbed and bloomed. She restored the wooden beams in the great hall, polished the stone floors until they gleamed. Each corner, each window, each tree in the surrounding grove bore the mark of her effort. It was not easy. Some nights she collapsed onto her bed, her body screaming in protest from the day's labor. But she always rose the next morning, fueled by the sight of her growing sanctuary. Piece by piece, the manor transformed from a relic of decay into a proud estate alive with color and strength. Neighbors began to notice. They marveled at the woman who had taken what was once a ruin and turned it into something remarkable. Some whispered that she must have hidden wealth, others that she was simply too stubborn to fail. Evelyn paid them no mind. She had no need for their approval. The only recognition she craved came from within, from the quiet pride she felt each time she looked at the gates and knew the land behind them was truly hers. This was why the betrayal cut so deep. Castillo Manor was not a gift she had been handed. It was not a family inheritance passed down through generations. It was the sum of every sacrifice she had made, every hour of exhaustion, every lonely night spent dreaming of something better. And now Marcus, the boy who had once watched her work herself to the bone, had decided that her dream was his stage to claim. Evelyn rose from her chair and walked slowly down the hallway, her fingers brushing along the cool stone walls. She remembered when those walls had been chipped and broken. She remembered hauling buckets of mortar painting over the scars of time. She thought of the rose garden outside the one she had planted in honor of her mother, who never lived to see her daughter's triumph. She thought of the oak tree she had trimmed herself, sweating under the summer sun until her hands blistered. Every detail of the manor told her story, and Marcus had chosen to erase that story with a wave of his hand. The thought made her heart tighten, but it also steeled her resolve. If her son and his fiancée thought they could rewrite the meaning of this place, they would soon learn how mistaken they were. Castillo Manor was not theirs to claim. It was not a backdrop for their celebration. It was the fortress she had built from blood and sacrifice. She stopped in the center of the great hall, the light from the high windows spilling across the floor. The silence around her was absolute, and yet Evelyn could almost hear the whispers of her past, urging her not to bend this time. Marcus believed she would stay silent. Celeste believed she would serve quietly in the background. But Evelyn knew the truth. The manor had given her strength, and she was about to use it. The question now was not whether she would act, but how. And as that thought settled in her mind, she began to feel the first stirrings of an idea. A bold, dangerous idea that would test not only her courage but the very foundation of her family ties. Evelyn Castillo had spent the morning tracing her steps through the manor, reminding herself of every stone, every flower, every memory she had claimed as her own. That walk through the house left her calmer but not at peace. Because now, as she sat in the great hall with the cold light of late afternoon streaming through the windows, she could no longer deny a truth she had tried for years to ignore. The betrayal she had discovered with the wedding invitations was not new. It was simply the loudest chapter in a long story of disregard. Her son Marcus had been disrespecting her and her home for years. She saw it now as clearly as the ivy crawling over the manor walls. At first it had seemed harmless. When Marcus was younger, he would come on weekends with his friends, bringing laughter and noise into the house. Evelyn, still glowing with pride over the manor, had thought of it as a sign that her son felt comfortable there. She told herself that family should always feel welcome. But slowly the welcome turned into assumption, and the assumption hardened into entitlement. There had been that first party unannounced. Evelyn had come home from town to find cars lining the driveway, music thundering from open windows, and strangers wandering her halls with drinks in their hands. Marcus had greeted her with a wide smile as if she should be pleased at the sight. "Relax, Mom," he had said. "It's just a little gathering." But the gathering had left stains on the floors, broken glass in the rose garden, and cigarette burns on the porch railing she had sanded herself. Evelyn had cleaned it all in silence, convincing herself that it was simply what mothers did. It had not stopped there. Each time Marcus came back, he brought more people. Sometimes it was a dozen. Sometimes it was 50. Celeste, his fiancée, arrived with him more often than not, her laughter high and sharp as she took over the living room as though she were the hostess. Evelyn still remembered the first time Celeste had dropped onto the velvet chair Evelyn had restored, with her own hands swinging her legs as if she were lounging in a cafe. "This place has so much potential," Celeste had said with that practiced smile of hers. "We should host all our gatherings here. Don't you think so, Evelyn?" Evelyn had smiled politely, then, though the words had stung, "We, our." As though Celeste had been the one to strip the peeling wallpaper, as though Marcus had been the one to plant rows of roses in soil that had fought against her hands. From then on, the manor was no longer Evelyn's sanctuary on weekends. It became Marcus and Celeste's playground. They arrived without warning, set up speakers on the lawn, and filled the rooms with laughter that belonged not to family but to strangers. Evelyn, like a fool, convinced herself she should be grateful. At least they enjoy the place, she told herself, even as she bent her tired back to scrub stains from the stone floors and to wash piles of dishes left in the sink. The small slights grew sharper with time. Celeste would order her about with a sweet smile that barely hid the edge of command. "Evelyn, could you put together a quick meal? More guests showed up than we expected. Evelyn, could you find extra blankets? Some of our friends are staying over." Each request was coded in politeness, but beneath it was the expectation that Evelyn would obey. And she did. Every time. Because she told herself that this was how families worked. She cooked, she cleaned. She smiled as if nothing was wrong. But deep inside, a resentment was building layer upon layer like sediment in a riverbed. By the time Marcus and Celeste announced their engagement, the entitlement had become unbearable. They spoke of the manor as if it were already theirs. Celeste would bring her parents and parade them through the rooms, boasting about the family estate. Marcus joked about how he and Celeste would one day make renovations. Evelyn had listened in silence, her heart pounding in her chest, each word another reminder that she was being erased from her own story. And then came the wedding invitations. 250 envelopes sent across the city and beyond, each one bearing the address of Castillo Manor as the grand venue. Evelyn had not been consulted. She had not been asked. She had not even been told. She only discovered the truth because strangers began calling to arrange deliveries. That was not oversight. That was not carelessness. That was the final proof of what she had become in their eyes. Not the owner, not the matriarch, but the caretaker of a property they believed was theirs, to use as they pleased. The realization made her chest ache, but it also hardened her resolve. That evening, Evelyn stood on the porch and looked out at the estate as the sun sank behind the pines. The air was cool, filled with the scent of salt from the coast. She imagined the chaos that was about to descend on her home, trucks, flowers, tables, chairs, music, guests, all marching onto her land as if she had no say. She thought of Celeste in her wedding gown smiling smugly, as if she had conquered something. She thought of Marcus dismissing her with the same careless tone he had used so many times before. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Not this time. For too long she had allowed herself to be treated as invisible, but the manor was hers. Every stone, every garden, every tree. It had been bought with her sacrifices and her pain, and she would not let Marcus and Celeste take it from her, not even for one day. She closed her eyes and let the night settle around her. Somewhere in the distance the waves crashed against the cliffs, steady and relentless, and as she listened she realized that she too could be steady, she too could be relentless. What she needed now was a plan, something that would not only protect her home but teach Marcus and Celeste the lesson they had avoided for too long. She opened her eyes, and for the first time since the phone call from the florist, Evelyn smiled. It was not a soft smile. It was sharp-edged with something dangerous. If her son wanted a wedding, he would get one, but not the wedding he imagined. The idea was only beginning to form, like the first flicker of fire in a cold hearth, but she could already feel its heat, and in that moment Evelyn Castillo knew that the days of silence were over. The phone sat on the small oak table in the great hall, its quiet presence filling the air like a challenge. Evelyn stared at it for a long time, her reflection faint in the polished surface. Every instinct told her to let it ring when Marcus eventually called, to let him wonder, to let him suffer. But silence was no longer enough. She needed to hear his voice. She needed to hear the truth in the way only a mother could. Her fingers trembled as she dialed his number. Each ring tightened the knot in her chest. At last the line clicked open. "Hello, Mom. Can this wait? I am busy at work," Marcus said. His voice was clipped, distracted, the tone of a man who believed his mother's needs could never outweigh his schedule. Evelyn forced calm into her voice. "We need to talk about Saturday." There was a pause, just long enough for her to feel the weight of her suspicion solidify. "What does Saturday have to do with you?" Marcus finally asked. His tone was cool, almost dismissive. Evelyn swallowed. "The florist called me. Then the caterer. Then the sound company. All of them. They all told me the same thing. My manor has been listed as the venue for your wedding." The silence that followed was colder than any words he could have spoken. She clutched the phone tighter, her knuckles white, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew this silence. It was not surprise, it was confirmation. Finally, Marcus sighed as though she were inconveniencing him. "Oh, right, I forgot to mention that. Don't worry, Mom, it is not going to cost you anything. Celeste and I are covering everything. All you need to do is make sure the house is tidy and maybe prepare some food for family staying after the party." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the table to steady herself. He spoke of her manor, her sanctuary, as if it were a banquet hall. He spoke of her as though she were the maid, not the owner. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury she barely contained. "You invited 250 people to my home without asking me. Do you realize what you have done?" He chuckled lightly, the sound dripping with condescension. 250 is an exaggeration. It is closer to 150. And think about it, Mom. You will get to meet Celeste's whole family. This is a big day for us. You should be happy. Happy. The word rang in her ears like a cruel joke. Happy to have strangers trample her gardens. Happy to see her house filled with noise and chaos. Happy to be treated as though she had no voice. Her grip on the phone tightened until her hand ached. "And what if I had other plans for that day?" she asked softly. He laughed outright this time. "Other plans, Mom, your life is quiet. This is our special day. What could you possibly have planned that matters more than our wedding?" The words pierced deeper than he could have imagined. Quiet. That was how he saw her life. Empty, quiet, meaningless compared to his own. Evelyn did not answer. She could not. Her throat closed, her chest tight with rage and hurt. She hung up without another word, the click of the receiver echoing like a gunshot in the silent hall. For a long time she stood there, the phone still in her hand, tears sliding down her cheeks. But they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of something far fiercer. This was not the Marcus she had raised. This was a man who saw his mother as a shadow, a servant, an afterthought, and perhaps that was her fault. Perhaps she had allowed it for too long, but no longer. She walked through the manor in silence, her steps steady, her mind racing. Each room she entered reminded her of what she had built. Each wall, each piece of furniture, every inch of the estate had been earned with years of sacrifice, and Marcus had dismissed it all with a careless laugh. By the time she returned to the kitchen, her tears had dried. In their place was a determination she had not felt in decades. She knew what had to be done. She poured herself a fresh cup of coffee, though her hands still shook, and sat at the table to think. The wedding was only days away. Marcus believed she would fold as she always had. He believed she would cook clean and smile, while he and Celeste paraded across her land as if it were theirs. He was wrong. This time Evelyn would not bend. This time she would act. And as the night settled over Castillo Manor, an idea began to form in her mind. An idea dangerous enough to change everything. The night after her call with Marcus, Evelyn hardly slept. She paced the manor's long corridors, her slippers whispering over polished floors that gleamed in the moonlight. Sleep seemed impossible when every thought circled back to his words, to the casual way he had dismissed her, the way he had turned her home into a stage without permission. She stopped often to press her hand against the stone walls, grounding herself. These walls had been hers for 10 years. They were the result of her blood, her exhaustion, her endless determination. And now Marcus thought he could erase all of that with a shrug and a laugh. But Evelyn was not the quiet woman he believed her to be. Not anymore. By dawn, her decision was made. If her son wanted a wedding at her manor, he would have to learn that it was not his to take. She would show him, not with pleading words, but with an action bold enough to shatter his arrogance. After her morning coffee, she sat at the old wooden desk in the library, picked up the phone and dialed the number she had written down months ago when she read about them in the town newspaper. The company was called Blackthorn Events, the most exclusive event planners in the region. Their clients were wealthy corporations, government officials, even visiting dignitaries. Their reputation was unmatched, and their fees were rumored to be extraordinary. The line clicked, and a man's voice answered smoothly. Blackthorn Events. This is Adrian Blackthorn. How may I assist you? Evelyn took a slow breath. My name is Evelyn Castillo. I want to rent my property for a private corporate event this Saturday. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. This Saturday. That is very short notice, ma'am. Our events are usually planned weeks, sometimes months in advance. I will pay double, Evelyn said firmly. It is a 74-acre estate fully restored. Colonial stone walls, rose gardens, privacy, and parking for more than 100 cars. If your clients need exclusivity, this is the place. The silence on the line shifted. She could hear his interest sharpening. Money always commanded attention, but her confidence carried weight of its own. Tell me more about the event, Mrs. Castillo, Adrian said. It is for international executives, Evelyn replied without hesitation, her voice steady despite the lie forming with ease. They demand complete discretion, maximum security, and no outside interruptions. That is non-negotiable. Another pause, then the man's tone grew respectful. I see. Very well. Could I visit your estate today to assess its suitability? Of course, Evelyn said. 2:00 sharp. I expect punctuality. When she ended the call, she let out a long, slow breath. Her heart pounded as though she had just run a race, but her hands no longer trembled. For the first time in days, she felt powerful. The hours before the meeting passed in a rush of activity. Evelyn scrubbed the floors until they shone, polished the brass fixtures, pruned the roses in the garden, and swept the porch clean. She wore her best dress, a deep burgundy that brought color back to her tired face, and pinned her silver hair neatly. By the time the clock struck, 2 Castillo Manor stood gleaming in the sunlight, every corner testifying to her pride. A black car rolled up the drive, followed by another. Adrian Blackthorn stepped out, tall and impeccably dressed, with an assistant at his side. His sharp eyes scanned the manor and the gardens, and Evelyn saw admiration flicker in his expression. Mrs. Castillo, he greeted, extending his hand. This place is remarkable. Thank you, Evelyn said. She led them through the gardens, across the porch, and into the grand hall. The assistant scribbled notes quickly, while Adrian's gaze lingered on the details, the carved beams, the polished stone floors, the sweeping view from the tall windows. This is worth far more than you realize, Adrian murmured at one point, almost to himself. Evelyn smiled faintly. It is worth everything I gave for it. By the end of the tour, the contract was drawn up. The terms were simple: 1 day's exclusive use payment in full, immediate setup, beginning Saturday afternoon. The fee was $5,000. Adrian signed without hesitation, and Evelyn felt the weight of the check in her hand like a weapon forged for battle. When the men departed, she stood alone in the great hall, the echoes of their footsteps fading. She touched the paper again, the ink still fresh. For years, Marcus and Celeste had never offered her a single dime for the damage they left behind, the food they demanded, the messes she cleaned. But strangers, men of business, had seen her estate and valued it instantly. That night, Evelyn sat on the porch with a glass of wine. The sea breeze swept through the garden, carrying the scent of roses. For the first time, she felt something she had long forgotten: control. But beneath her satisfaction, a tremor of unease stirred. She had set the stage for a confrontation unlike any her family had faced before. The gala would arrive polished and powerful. And when Marcus and Celeste came with their guests, they would walk into a world they never expected. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the breeze cool her face. She had made her move. The counterstroke was in place. Now she thought, let them come. The next morning, Evelyn awoke with the strange calm that comes after a storm. The decision had been made. The contract with Blackthorn Events was signed. Castillo Manor was no longer the backdrop for her son's stolen wedding. It was booked, secured, and paid for. She sat on the porch sipping her coffee, listening to the gulls crying overhead and the pines shifting in the early breeze. For the first time in years, she felt anticipation, not dread. Yet she knew the quiet would not last. By 9 o'clock, the first call came. "Mrs. Castillo, this is Gregory from Ocean View Catering. We are delivering the 3-course menu for the Castillo Beaumont wedding. Where should our trucks unload on Saturday?" Evelyn smiled faintly into the phone. "You will need to speak with Marcus or Celeste. I have no knowledge of such an event." The man hesitated, clearly confused. "But ma'am, the invitations list this address. We have the contract signed. Are you certain?" "As certain as the stone beneath my feet," she replied, and ended the call. She did not have long to rest. The photographer called next, eager to confirm locations for portraits. Then the sound company rang, asking about power outlets for their equipment. Each time Evelyn gave the same calm answer: she knew nothing about a wedding. By mid-morning, the truth had spread. Vendors began calling Marcus directly, their questions growing sharper. And just before noon, the inevitable happened. Her phone rang, and Celeste's voice erupted through the line without greeting. "Evelyn, what on earth is going on? The florist says he cannot get access. The caterer says there is another event booked. Everyone is telling me something different." Evelyn let the silence stretch before answering, her tone deliberately mild. "That must be a misunderstanding. The only event I know of is a private corporate gathering arranged for Saturday afternoon." The pause on the other end carried a weight of pure disbelief. Then Celeste's voice rose sharp with fury. "A corporate event? You cannot be serious. Do you have any idea what you are doing? This is our wedding. Our guests are flying in tomorrow. Do you want to humiliate us in front of everyone?" Evelyn leaned back in her chair, watching the light scatter across the garden. "It is not my humiliation at stake, Celeste. It is yours. Perhaps you should have spoken to me before printing invitations with my address." Celeste gasped, her breath quick and shallow. "We thought it was understood. This is the family estate. We did not think we needed to ask." There it was, the unspoken belief spoken aloud at last. Evelyn closed her eyes, savoring the bitter clarity of the moment. "It is not the family estate," she said firmly. "It is my estate, and I decide who uses it and when." The line went quiet, and then Celeste muttered something about Marcus before hanging up. Evelyn set the phone down carefully, her pulse steady. She had expected anger, and she welcomed it, because she knew what would come next. Sure enough, less than an hour later, the roar of an engine carried up the long gravel drive. Evelyn rose and stepped onto the porch, just in time to see Marcus's car kick up a cloud of dust. He parked with a violent turn, and he and Celeste climbed out. Their faces were tight, their steps quick, as though they were soldiers marching into battle. "Mom, what the hell is happening here?" Marcus demanded the moment his feet touched the porch steps. His voice was louder than she had ever heard it, cracking with fury. "All the vendors are calling us saying you rented the house for something else. Tell me it is a mistake." Evelyn folded her hands in front of her and looked him directly in the eyes. "It is no mistake. Castillo Manor is booked for Saturday. A corporate event. Contract signed, payment received." Marcus stared at her as though she had grown into a stranger. Celeste's face twisted with disbelief. "You cannot do this," she hissed. "This is our wedding. 250 guests are expecting to be here. The church has already been informed. Our families have traveled from across the country. Do you understand what you are destroying?" "What you destroyed," Evelyn corrected softly. "The moment you decided I did not deserve the courtesy of being asked, you assumed, and now you must live with the consequences." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, pacing like a man trapped. "Cancel the corporate thing. Tell them it was a mistake. We will pay you back. I do not care how much it costs." "I will not cancel," Evelyn said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with fire. "This is not about money. It is about respect." Celeste stepped closer, her eyes wide, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please, Evelyn, think about what you are doing. Think about your grandchildren. If you ruin this day for us, you will regret it forever." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn's heart clenched for an instant, but then it hardened. She had bent too many times before. "Not this time. Leave," she said simply. "You have until Saturday morning to find another venue." The words dropped like stones into the silence. Marcus's face flushed red, his jaw clenched tight. Celeste shook her head, muttering in disbelief, as though the world itself had turned against her. They left in a flurry of dust, their car tearing back down the road. Evelyn stood on the porch long after they had vanished, her body trembling, but her resolve unshaken. The storm had begun. And the true test was still to come. Saturday arrived like a storm Evelyn had been waiting for all her life. She rose before dawn, bathing slowly, choosing her clothes with care. No faded house dress today, no plain sweater. Instead, she slipped into her deep wine-colored gown, the one she had kept folded away for years. She fastened her mother's pearl earrings, brushed her silver hair until it shone, and applied a touch of rouge to her cheeks. When she looked in the mirror, she did not see the tired nurse who had once bent beneath endless hospital shifts. She saw the lady of Castillo Manor, the rightful mistress of every stone, every garden, every acre. By 8 o'clock she was seated on the porch, a cup of coffee warming her hands as mist drifted across the grounds. The manor was silent, but her heart thudded with anticipation. She did not know exactly what would happen, but she knew one thing with certainty today. Her son and his fiancée would learn the cost of disrespect. The first sign of the day's unraveling arrived at 10. A large truck pulled into the drive, its side painted with bright flowers. The florist stepped out, confusion plain on his face, when he spotted the signs that Blackthorn's crew had posted earlier: private corporate event, no trespassing. He climbed the porch steps, clutching his clipboard. "Ma'am, I am here with the arrangements for the Castillo Beaumont wedding. We have 20 centerpieces, an arch of roses petals for the aisle." Evelyn set down her cup. "I am sorry. There is no wedding here today. The manor is booked for a corporate function." The man blinked, startled. "But I have a signed contract. Thousands of dollars in flowers." "Then you will need to speak with the bride and groom," Evelyn replied evenly. "They never signed anything with me." The florist's shoulders slumped, and he returned to his truck, muttering under his breath. Evelyn almost pitied him. Almost, but there was no time for pity. One after another, the others came: the caterers with silver trays of chilled salmon and bottles of champagne, the sound technicians hauling heavy speakers, the photographers with their cameras slung around their necks. Each of them stopped short at the gates, bewildered by the sight of Blackthorn's team already at work. By noon, the transformation was in full swing. Adrian Blackthorn and his crew moved with swift precision, setting up round tables draped in crisp white cloths, arranging polished cutlery, and elegant centerpieces, erecting a stage for presentations. The great hall echoed with the steady rhythm of their work. Evelyn walked among them like a queen, inspecting her soldiers, her heart swelling with pride as her manor gleamed in their hands. Then the guests began to arrive. The first sleek black cars rolled in just after 1 o'clock, carrying executives in tailored suits and polished shoes. They stepped out shaking Evelyn's hand with warm respect, thanking her for the privilege of using her estate. "Mrs. Castillo, this place is magnificent," one of them said, bowing his head slightly. She smiled graciously, her pride deepening. For once strangers valued her more than her own blood. But as the clock crept past 2, another stream of cars appeared at the gates. Not sleek sedans this time, but colorful vehicles decorated with ribbons carrying men in pressed suits and women in flowing dresses. The wedding guests, confusion rippled through them as they spilled from their cars. They glanced from the invitations in their hands to the bold corporate signs at the gate. Their faces shifted from surprise to annoyance to dawning horror. Some approached Evelyn directly, their voices polite but strained. "Excuse me, ma'am," one woman asked, her gown glittering in the sunday. "Is this not the site of Marcus and Celeste's wedding?" Evelyn lifted her chin. "I am afraid the manor is unavailable. It has been rented for another event." The woman gasped, turning to whisper frantically to her companions. Soon a crowd gathered near the gate, murmuring in disbelief. Children ran across the gravel, grandparents leaned on canes, and cousins fanned themselves in the afternoon heat, waiting for an explanation that would never come. Then at last came the moment Evelyn had been waiting for. A white car adorned with silver ribbons pulled up the long drive. The groom stepped out first, Marcus in his black tuxedo, his face pale beneath its polish. Celeste followed radiant in her ivory gown, the long train brushing against the dust of the drive. For a heartbeat, Evelyn almost saw them as any mother might her son on his wedding day, nervous, handsome, filled with promise. But then she remembered his words, "Your life is quiet." What could matter more than our wedding? And the warmth in her heart froze. The couple's smiles faltered as they turned toward the manor. Instead of an arch of roses, they saw a stage with a corporate logo projected on a towering screen. Instead of family members filling the lawn, they saw executives in dark suits sipping champagne at gleaming tables. Celeste's hand flew to her mouth. No, this cannot be happening. Marcus spun toward the porch, his eyes blazing. "Mom, what have you done?" Evelyn rose slowly, smoothing the folds of her gown, and stepped to the edge of the porch. She looked down at her son and his bride, her voice steady, her expression calm. "What I should have done years ago," she said. Marcus charged up the porch steps, as though each board beneath his feet might splinter beneath the weight of his anger. Celeste followed close behind her gown, dragging in the gravel, her veil trembling in the wind. The wedding guests crowded at the gate, murmuring and pointing, while the corporate executives turned in their seats, watching the scene unfold like a play they had not paid to attend. "Cancel this right now," Marcus barked, his face red with fury. "Send these people away. This is my wedding, our wedding. You cannot do this to us." Evelyn folded her hands in front of her, her expression unreadable. "I did not do this to you. You did it to yourself the moment you decided my manor was yours to take." Celeste stepped forward, her eyes glistening with panic. "Evelyn, please think about what you are saying. There are 250 people out there waiting. They have traveled from across the country, some from across the ocean. You cannot ruin this day for us." "I am not ruining anything," Evelyn replied. Her voice was calm, but it carried enough force to cut through the air like glass. "I rented my home to people who respect it. People who paid for the privilege of being here, you chose to assume, and now you are reaping the consequences." Marcus's hands curled into fists. "This is ridiculous. You want money, fine. I will pay you. 5,000, 10,000, 20. Just cancel the corporate thing and let us use the house." For a heartbeat, Evelyn's eyes flickered. 20,000, 4 times what Blackthorn had given her, more money than she had ever seen at once in her life. But she steadied herself. This was not about money. She shook her head. "It is too late. I signed a contract. And unlike you, Marcus, I honor agreements." The words stung him like a slap. His jaw clenched and his eyes burned with the humiliation of being denied. Celeste's voice broke as she dropped to her knees on the porch, steps her dress spreading across the wood like a white cloud. "Evelyn, I am begging you. Please do not do this. Think of Marcus. Think of your grandchildren. Think of your family. We will do whatever you want. We will pay rent. We will help with expenses. We will respect your rules. Just, please." Let us have our day." The sight should have softened Evelyn. Once it would have. But she had heard promises before, always spoken in moments of desperation, always forgotten once the crisis had passed. She bent slightly, her eyes sharp as steel. Respect is not begged for after the fact. It is given from the start, and you have never given me any. Celeste sobbed, her tears streaking the paint on her cheeks. Marcus paced the porch like a trapped animal, his tuxedo wrinkling, his composure disintegrating. "Mom, this is insane. You are supposed to support me. You are supposed to be there for me on my wedding day. What kind of mother does this?" Evelyn straightened to her full height, her chin lifting with quiet authority. A mother who is tired of being treated like a housekeeper in her own home. A mother who sacrificed everything for decades to give her child a life only to be dismissed as if she were nothing. "That is the kind of mother I am today." For a moment silence fell. Even the executives sipping their champagne a few yards away had stopped speaking. The only sound was the faint rustle of the pines and the distant crash of the sea. Then from behind the crowd a new voice cut through the tension. Father Alaric, the priest who had been scheduled to officiate the ceremony, stepped forward. His black robes billowed slightly in the wind as he climbed the steps. "Enough," he said softly but with authority. He looked first at Evelyn, then at Marcus and Celeste. "This has gone far enough. We are not here to trade insults or bargains. We are here to celebrate love, but love cannot survive without respect." Marcus's face crumpled. "Father, please, help us. Tell her she cannot do this. Tell her she has to let us marry here." The priest's eyes, dark and steady, turned to Evelyn. "Tell me your side," he said gently. Evelyn did not hesitate. She told him everything. The years of parties, the unannounced guests, the endless demands, the invitation sent without a word, the phone call where her son had dismissed her life as quiet and unimportant. Her voice trembled with fury, but she spoke each word with the clarity of someone who had held her tongue for far too long. Father Alaric listened in silence, his hands clasped before him. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. Then he turned to Marcus and Celeste. "And I understand you as well. But understand this, you cannot build your future on the foundation of disrespect. If you begin your marriage by treating your mother as though she does not matter, what does that say about the respect you will give to one another?" Celeste wiped at her face, her tears coming faster. Marcus turned away, his shoulders heaving with frustration, his pride collapsing in the eyes of all who watched. Evelyn remained still, her gaze unwavering. She had made her choice. The question now was whether Marcus and Celeste would face the consequences or finally begin to change. And as the silence deepened, as 250 guests shifted restlessly at the gates, and the executives waited for the show to continue, Evelyn knew the showdown was far from over. The real lesson had only just begun. The porch had become a stage. On one side stood Marcus and Celeste, their faces pale and desperate, their wedding clothes already losing their sheen under the weight of humiliation. On the other stood Evelyn, composed in her wine-colored gown, her pearls gleaming in the afternoon light. Between them, Father Alaric lingered, his quiet presence like a judge presiding over a trial. The murmurs of 250 wedding guests carried from the gate a restless tide of voices, asking questions that had no answers. The corporate executives seated at their elegant tables had abandoned their conversations entirely, their attention fixed on the unfolding family drama. The air itself seemed to thrum with tension. Evelyn broke the silence first. Her voice was calm, steady, but sharper than steel. "You want your wedding here. You want your guests to see you married under my roof in my garden. Very well, it may happen, but only under my conditions." Marcus stopped pacing, his eyes snapping to hers. Celeste lifted her tear-streaked face, hope flickering like a dying flame. "Conditions," Marcus repeated, his voice taut. "What kind of conditions?" Evelyn stepped closer, her presence filling the space. "First, from this day forward, no event may ever be held at Castillo Manor without my approval. Not one dinner, not one gathering, not one party. You will come to me a month in advance. You will ask politely, and you will wait for my answer. If I say no, then it is no." Celeste nodded quickly, her hands clutching at the folds of her gown. "Yes, of course, whatever you want." Second, Evelyn continued, her eyes fixed on Marcus. Now you will pay for the privilege. $1,000 every month plus all expenses for upkeep whenever you wish to use the manor. You have treated this place like your playground for years. From now on you will treat it like what it is: valuable, hard-earned, and mine. Marcus swallowed hard. $1,000 a month. That is, cheap, Evelyn interrupted coldly. Cheap compared to what others are willing to pay for even a single evening here. She let the words hang in the air, reminding him of the executives sipping champagne just a few feet away. Marcus pressed his lips together and said nothing. Third, Evelyn said, her voice rising enough to carry beyond the porch during today's ceremony. I will be recognized publicly as the owner and hostess of Castillo Manor. Not as a servant, not as a quiet background figure, but as the woman who built and maintained this estate. Every guest here will know whose home this is. Celeste's face flushed scarlet, but she nodded again. Yes, we can do that. Evelyn took one last step forward, her shadow falling over them. And finally, during the reception, I will raise my glass and tell the truth. I will tell your guests how this wedding was planned without me, how invitations were sent with my address as if I did not exist, how this day nearly collapsed because no one thought I was worthy of respect. Every person who eats and drinks under this roof will know the full story. Celeste's eyes widened in horror. No, you cannot. I can, Evelyn said, cutting her off. And I will. If you want your wedding here, you will accept that truth spoken aloud. If you cannot bear it, then take your guests elsewhere. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the restless shifting of the crowd beyond the gates. Marcus looked at Celeste, his face stricken. She shook her head furiously, tears spilling down her cheeks. They will think we are monsters, she whispered. They will think the truth, Evelyn replied. Father Alaric cleared his throat softly. This is harsh, Evelyn. Public humiliation may scar your family ties forever. Evelyn met his gaze. And private humiliation has scarred me for years. The difference is that mine was invisible. Theirs will last minutes. And it may finally teach them what I have been denied all this time. The priest fell silent, his expression grave but understanding. Marcus turned back to his mother, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and desperation. Is there truly no other way? There is none, Evelyn said firmly. Accept all my conditions, or your wedding ends before it begins. The weight of the decision pressed down on them. Celeste sobbed openly, clinging to Marcus's arm. He stood rigid, his face pale, his breath coming fast. The choice was clear, and yet it cut at his pride like a knife. At last Celeste whispered, We accept. Marcus hesitated a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Yes, we accept. Evelyn inclined her head, her expression unreadable. Good. Then prepare yourselves. Your ceremony will happen, but on my terms, under my rules, and with my truth. As she turned back toward the manor, the guests at the gate pressed closer, restless with confusion, while the executives murmured among themselves, intrigued by the spectacle. The stage was set, the terms were agreed. But the most important act was still to come. By late afternoon, Castillo Manor had become a place unlike anything Evelyn had ever seen. The corporate executives finished their presentations and clinked glasses of champagne, lingering to watch the spectacle unfolding before them. The Blackthorn team dismantled their stage with swift precision, clearing space beneath the great mango tree at the edge of the garden. The wedding guests, who had spent hours in confusion at the gates, were finally ushered inside, their faces a mix of relief and indignation. The estate had transformed into something halfway between a ballroom and a battlefield. Evelyn watched it all from her porch, her gown catching the last orange rays of the Sunday. She felt the weight of 250 eyes, but she was not afraid. She had waited her entire life for this moment, the moment when she was no longer invisible. By 5 o'clock, the ceremony began. Father Alaric stood beneath the mango tree, his voice steady, his words carrying over the restless crowd. Marcus stood in his tuxedo, pale, but composed, his jaw clenched, as though each vow pressed against his pride. Celeste, radiant in her ivory gown despite the dirt at its hem, clutched his hand tightly, her face still streaked with the remnants of earlier tears. The guests leaned forward, eager to salvage a celebration from the wreckage of the day. The executives sipped their wine with quiet curiosity, marveling at the strangeness of it all. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, and when Father Alaric finally pronounced them husband and wife, a wave of applause swept across the garden. For a brief moment, Evelyn almost felt her heart soften. This was her son, after all, her only child, and he was beginning a new life, but the softness quickly hardened. Love without respect was an empty promise, and tonight the lesson would be written into memory. As twilight settled, lanterns were lit along the garden path, and guests gathered for the reception. Tables glittered with glassware and plates, the remnants of the corporate feast now serving the newlyweds. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but beneath it all an undercurrent of unease lingered. Everyone knew something unusual had happened, though few understood the truth. Then Adrian Blackthorne approached Evelyn, a glass of champagne in one hand and a microphone in the other. He bowed slightly. "Mrs. Castillo, as the hostess of this extraordinary evening, it is only fitting that you deliver the toast." The moment had arrived. Evelyn rose slowly, the pearls at her ears glinting under the lantern light. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the stone path, and took the microphone. The noise of the crowd dimmed until only the faint rustle of pine branches and the distant crash of waves remained. 250 guests, along with the executives, turned toward her, waiting for the sentimental words of a proud mother. She let the silence stretch, commanding their attention. Then she began, "Good evening. My name is Evelyn Castillo. I am Marcus's mother, and I am also the sole owner of this estate where you sit tonight." A ripple of applause rose, polite and warm, but Evelyn's voice sharpened as she continued. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate this marriage. But I must confess something to you. I learned of this wedding the same way you did, by receiving an invitation. I was never asked if my home could be used. My son and his bride decided that my voice did not matter." A murmur swept through the crowd. Guests glanced at one another in disbelief, their eyes darting from Evelyn to the bride and groom. Celeste lowered her head, her cheeks blazing red. Marcus's face tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. "For 40 years, Evelyn continued, her voice steady. I worked as a nurse. I cared for the sick, the dying, the forgotten. I saved every dollar I could, denying myself comfort, until at last I bought this place. Every stone, every flower, every tree on this land was restored by my hands. This manor is not a family heirloom. It is not a gift. It is the result of sacrifice." The silence deepened, heavy and sharp. Even the children sat still. "And yet for years I have been treated not as its owner but as its servant. Strangers have filled these halls without my consent. Demands have been made of me as though I were a maid in my own house. And now my son believed he could claim my home for his wedding without even asking." Evelyn lifted her glass, her gaze sweeping across the stunned crowd. "But tonight is different. Tonight I stand before you as the woman I truly am, the mistress of Castillo Manor. And I tell you, this love without respect is not love at all. Respect is not optional. Respect is not begged for after the fact. It is demanded from the beginning." Applause erupted, not polite this time, but thunderous. Guests rose to their feet, clapping and nodding. The executives cheered, some even raising their own glasses in admiration. Marcus, tears brimming in his eyes, stepped forward and embraced her. "I am sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have seen. I should have asked. I should have respected you." Celeste, trembling, approached next, her voice hoarse with shame. "Thank you for letting us marry here despite everything. I promise we will never forget this lesson." Evelyn held them both for a moment, her heart heavy yet proud. Tonight she had reclaimed what was hers. But as the music swelled and the celebration continued, she knew the real change would not be proven in words spoken under lantern light. It would be proven in the days, the months, the years that followed. And that story, the story of what came after, was only just beginning. The wedding night lingered long into the evening. Lanterns glowed softly over the gardens, laughter echoed beneath the mango tree, and music drifted across the estate. Yet beneath the surface of celebration lay a tension no one could ignore. The story of what had happened that day spread quickly among the guests. Whispers filled the air, hushed voices marveling at the strength of Evelyn Castillo and the boldness of her speech. By the time the last toast was raised and the final guest departed, Evelyn was exhausted but unshaken. She sat alone on the porch as the moon rose, gazing at the stars above the pines. The estate was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. Tonight the silence felt powerful. She had reclaimed her voice. She had demanded the respect that had been denied her for so long. In the days that followed, the story of the wedding spread beyond the manor walls. In town, people spoke of nothing else. At the market, neighbors whispered, "Did you hear what she did? She rented her home out from under her own son and stood her ground until he admitted his mistake." At church, Father Alaric referred to her story as a lesson about honoring parents and the dignity they deserve. Even strangers who had never met Evelyn nodded with admiration when her name was mentioned. Blackthorn events returned the next week. Adrian himself shook her hand firmly, his respect plain in his eyes. "Mrs. Castillo," he said, "your estate is extraordinary, but more than that, your resolve has made you unforgettable. I would like to offer you a contract, regular rentals, corporate clients, exclusive weddings. Castillo Manor could become the most sought-after venue in the region." Evelyn accepted. For the first time in her life, she had not only financial stability, but independence. Each weekend, cars lined the gravel drive, bringing guests in fine clothes and clients willing to pay handsomely for the privilege of gathering in her home. What had once been a dream of survival had become a thriving business. And Marcus, true to his word that night, he changed. At first, Evelyn doubted him. She had heard apologies before, but this time actions followed. Every month, on the first of the month, a payment arrived in her account. $1,000, exactly as she had demanded. When Marcus and Celeste wanted to host a family dinner, they called weeks in advance, asking politely if the date was available. If Evelyn said no, they did not argue. If she said yes, they arrived early to prepare the food themselves, leaving Evelyn to sit at the head of the table as the honored hostess. It startled her at first, to see Celeste in her kitchen sleeves rolled up washing dishes after dinner. To hear Marcus ask Mom, "Do you need anything?" instead of demanding she serve his friends. Slowly the wounds began to heal. They had finally learned the meaning of respect. 6 months later, Evelyn's life was transformed. The manor, once quiet and lonely, was alive with events and celebrations. The income provided her with comfort she had never known. She traveled into town, not as a weary nurse or an overlooked mother, but as the matriarch of Castillo Manor, a woman who had stood her ground. Young women came to her for advice on setting boundaries with their families. Older women thanked her for showing them that it was never too late to demand dignity. Even Father Alaric mentioned her story in his sermons. On quiet evenings when the guests had gone and the estate was once again still, Evelyn would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and look at the stars. She thought about the path that had brought her here. 40 years of labor, years of silence, and then at last the courage to say no. Her son and his wife now treated her with reverence. Her community respected her. Her manor flourished. But the greatest change was within herself. Evelyn Castillo no longer saw herself as a shadow or a servant. She was the owner of her destiny, the lady of her house, and the author of her own story. She had proven to herself, to her son, and to the world that respect was not optional, and she knew now that as long as she lived, she would never allow anyone to take her voice away again. This story is about the power of self-respect and the importance of boundaries. Evelyn's journey shows that no matter how long you have been overlooked, it is never too late to stand up for yourself. Love without respect is hollow. Family bonds cannot thrive when they are built on disregard. True dignity comes when we demand the respect we deserve and refuse to accept less. If you were moved by Evelyn's story, remember to like this video, share it with others who might need encouragement, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful story. Your support helps us bring you more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us all of the strength we carry within.